Hi there. So last year, 16-17, was very much all about the money. The money is always a major priority. It'll still be a major priority this year. Lawrence is going to talk to you about that a bit later. But you can't really overestimate the importance of hitting the 4-hour target for A&E this year. So it's make or break stuff. The NHS seriously needs to get a grip back on the system. It's been under a lot of pressure. And it also needs to build credibility with the Treasury and DH. We heard from Alistair that they're not that convinced by the 5-year forward view. So if they are going to go back and ask for more money, which they probably will do at some point, they'll need to be able to point to proven track record. So just to recap quickly on what the 4-hour target is. It's one of the service's core standards as set out in the planning guidance. It measures the point at which any patient arrives at A&E to when they are admitted, discharged or transferred elsewhere, regardless of how sick they are. So this issue of acuity is important. I'll come back to it in a bit. The next steps document, the 5-year forward view refresh, set out some targets. It said by September the system will be at 90%. By March 2018, that most trusts will be fully compliant at 95%, and the whole system will be fully compliant by sometime during 2018. This is a huge ask. In my opinion, you have to be very brave to say that they're going to hit that. I don't think they will. Attendances are rising. They're up over 7% since 2010-11. The acuity of those attendees is getting worse, largely down to an older population, and funding is, as we know, very tight, has been in the past and will be for the foreseeable future. The system is currently at around 85%, something like that. So the last time the system hit the 95% target was back in July 2015, and performance at the moment is currently the worst it's been for about 15 years. So there was some speculation earlier this year that the 4-hour target was going to be dropped. It seemed like Jeremy Hunt was flying a bit of a kite. That kite got shot down, and DH quickly backtracked. So now it appears very much that the 4-hour target is here to stay, certainly in the short term. It's unpopular with some senior NHS managers who feel that it's too blunt, but it does have the support of patient groups. It's got the support of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, and critically, the Secretary of State and senior NHS England managers. So it's got supporters and critics. Will it be around forever? I don't know, possibly not, but it's certainly the main game in town for 17-18. So I'm going to split A&E broadly into two parts. One is this hitting the target in 17-18, and the other part is bigger reconfigurations to make A&E systems sustainable in the longer term. That's something that colleagues are going to be talking about, but it's about splitting into hot and cold sites where you have elective care on one site and more emergency care on the other. They're quite politically challenging, but due to time constraints, I'm going to focus on the here and now and the 4-hour target. I also want you to think of A&E in terms of three things. When I've talked to senior NHS England people, they always talk about A&E in terms of controlling demand, capacity and flow. So I think that's a useful prism through which to see A&E, and a useful prism to do any business scenario planning through. It's also important to realise that, as colleagues have mentioned already, that A&E is not just a problem in emergency departments. It's very much a kind of system-wide problem that starts at the front door, the ED, and goes all the way through to social care. So what does all this mean? I'll do some predictions for 17-18. Beyond that, might not be so clever. So patients with minor injuries will continue to attend A&E, despite what Next Steps says. So the Next Steps document says there's a comprehensive plan to reduce the growth in the minor cases that present at A&E. For a range of measures, most of those measures have been going on for a while. We're talking about extending GP hours, more support for out-of-hours services, giving the 111 service a revamp, getting higher rate of calls dealt with by clinicians, that sort of thing. But if you speak to senior NHS system leaders, they will admit, privately at least, that they don't think they're going to be able to develop this kind of channel shift in the management jargon too quickly, certainly not in short term, probably not the medium term, and maybe not the long term. We're talking about a very tough nut to crack. Patients need educating about the right places to go. We all work and involved in the NHS, and sometimes I get quite confused about it. So for someone who's not, it's a fragmented, confusing system which is hard to navigate and difficult to know which service is the right one to go to. This sort of culture change always takes time. So yeah, it's probably going to stay like that for a while. Also, many of the A&E support services where people in the A&E should be sent to are very patchy at the moment. So they need to be sorted out before patients are sent there. We're going to see a big push on streaming, what's called streaming, at the front door emergency department. So all trusts are supposed to have fully deployed streaming arrangements in by October, helped by a modest but very welcome £100 million of capital funding, which came in a budget. That funding is out, well, about half of it got announced just hours before the PERDA deadline, about 56 million, I think it was. That's been allocated to trusts. When we did the story on that, one finance director wrote an open-leaf story saying, I applied for some cash, I got £1 million, God knows what I'm going to do with it. So if you guys have got some good ideas, you should go and speak to people about them. Again, going back to demand, capacity and flow, and these GP streaming arrangements, Luton and Dunstable is the kind of exemplar model, but certainly a wide range of ways of doing streaming, which is essentially, whether it's a nurse or GP-led model, it involves patients being assessed as soon as they arrive at A&E and then being sent on to more appropriate clinicians, if they've got more sort of minor ailments, non-emergency illnesses. So having GPs on site obviously is very helpful for that. While streaming is about decluttering the front end, there's the back end of the system as well, sort of getting people back out of hospitals, back to the community. So the 2 billion of social care funding was allocated in the budget. As you have no doubt heard, the NHS struggles with patients who are medically fit to leave, but they end up staying in the hospital because there's no community bed available or care home bed available, or the home care package hasn't been sorted out, all these sort of problems. These are called delayed transfers of care. Detox, they drive up hospital bed occupancy levels, and then when new emergency admissions come in, there's not enough space. So system leaders think that better discharging could free up between 2,000 and 3,000 hospital beds. That's the equivalent of about 5 hospitals. However, there's a big but for the NHS in all this. The health service will have no formal influence over the spending in 2017-18. This is a big concern. After the announcement was made, just after the budget, one senior system leader said via HSJ that the trusts should be lippy with their local authority counterparts, and they should really try and influence how the money's spent. But there's a lot of concerns, first of all, that relationships aren't that good, and therefore they're not going to have the influence, and also just that NHS managers don't understand social care well enough. One very senior person was telling me that recently. It's a big concern. So we're also going to see some new metrics. The NHS likes its metrics, but this one is certainly being driven from the very top. Simon Stevens spoke about it in a recent interview we did. So it's about emergency admissions and emergency bed days. The metrics are due to come out for STPs in July. Emergency bed days refers to the length of stay of patients who have come in as an emergency rather than come in for an elective procedure. The new metrics will hopefully be helpful at working out where the blockages are in the system, but unfortunately will also be another kind of administrative burden for trusts to deal with. Then there's the development of the new A&E scorecard. So this is being led by NHS Improvement. I spoke earlier about how the 4-hour target is viewed as a bit blunt, it's being gamed, and it drives perverse incentives. So a new metric would be, the new metric should be more nuanced. It will take into account how long people are in A&E as well, but hopefully They're trying to make it so that it can take into account the acuity of those patients, the patient experience, and also the staff experience. How important this is remains to be seen, but it's worth keeping an eye on. So, what are the implications of all this? Well, trust will be under immense pressure from regulators. We're already hearing about a lot of phone calls going on to hit the 4-hour target. Interventions which help demand, capacity, flow at both the back and the front door are going to be very much in demand, and we know that there's already a little bit of capital around to deal with the streaming side. Elective performance, as Dave said, is it's going to slide. It's not a priority this year, so the 18-week target, they've admitted it's not going to be hit, it's going to be relaxed. This may well store up big problems for 18-19, but as I've already said, this year is about the 4-hour target, and they're very focused on that. So while the relaxing of the RTT target isn't directly linked with improving A&E, it's worth bearing in mind in any sort of business scenario planning that you're doing that the elective target just is not that high on the agenda at the moment. Winter 17-18, it's going to be politically very important. We've already heard that there's some trust issues between the NHS, the Treasury, and Number 10. The NHS isn't very high up the agenda, but they want to keep it quiet, and a big, messy winter could have quite a lot of ramifications. NHS staffing, again, it's going to be, it's tough already. David is going to be talking about Brexit later and the wider workforce issues, but emergency departments are one of the worst hits already. You've got generally the work-life balance is very tough if you work in ED, and they're seeing a lot of doctors leaving to general practice, to anaesthesia, going to Australia, that kind of thing. The AME locum bill is £3 million a week. That's £150 million a year, which could conservatively pay for 15 new emergency departments, or could double the number of A&E consultants the NHS currently has. So this is a huge problem. NHS Improvement is currently working on a new workforce plan, especially for A&E, but there's unlikely to be any quick fixes to that. And I think it's quite embryonic. So yeah, that problem's just going to build and build. Worth remembering, though, that while the new cash has largely gone to social care, the major budget holders still reside in the NHS. It's also worth noting, we're talking about the NHS before being in a more centralising phase in terms of decision making, but in the short term, in 17-18, with A&E, the budget decisions are very much going to be taken at trust level. So again, when doing business planning, worth remembering that. Also, the social care cash, as you'll hear a bit later, there's a lot of strings attached to it. It's probably going to be swallowed up by a lot of existing deficits anyway. So yeah, it will take a while to have any impact on the system. So, key messages. Hitting the 4-hour target is the main priority. Can't really stress that enough. It's the main focus for key NHS decision makers, and any funding is likely to be channeled towards helping that in some way. Addressing A&E is a system-wide problem across the whole of health and social care. Problems in the ED are just the tip of the iceberg. Getting patients out of the hospital, freeing up beds is the bigger issue. And then demand, capacity, and flow. We're talking about the controlling of demand, the flow throughout the hospital, and capacity issues in general. If you've got products which address these issues, you're probably knocking on an open door. So, on that very optimistic note, I am going to pass over to Lawrence, who's going to talk about the finances, which might not be so cheery. Thanks.